A lot of people ask the question, who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? I wonder if there's any other creature in all the universe who asked that question. What am I? Why am I here? It seems like all the other creatures in the world seem to know who they are and why they're here. But as human beings, for some reason, I don't know if we lost it. Maybe we did. We lost our way. Maybe at some point we knew what we are and why we're here, and we lost it. I'm not sure, but it seems like a lot of us are asking that question, aren't they? I'm sure you are. I have, certainly, and still do. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how do we discover what we are? Are we to discover what our purpose is? People say be yourself. That's what you need to do. Just be yourself. But the only issue with that is it seems like the mind comes back in and says, oh, be myself, and it comes up with some persona, some image that we're trying to be. Someone has said that if you can be completely comfortable with not knowing who you are, this is going to sound strange, I know, but if you can be completely comfortable with not knowing who you are, then what is left is who you are. Yeah, I told you it was strange. But it's really true. I mean, to find yourself, you've got to find something that's behind all this image. It's kind of like this. It's like if you've played video games, when you, those of you who are familiar with this, and for those who aren't, when you sit down to play the game, and say, it's you and someone else playing, or it's you against the game, and there are these other characters in the game, the only way you can know which person you're actually operating is that before the game starts, you have to choose what's called an avatar. You have to decide, what do I look like? Who am I on the screen? And that's kind of what we're doing as we go through life, is we're trying to decide, who am I on the screen of life? I mean, what do I look like? What is my culture? Some of that, it seems to be decided for us, but we still have to kind of discover it, don't we? And so we go about wondering, who are we? What are we? What is my purpose? Why am I here? Well, Jesus kind of gives us a picture of that. He tries to tell us, what we are. Here's something for you. I think that Jesus, comes to earth not just to show us what God is like, but to show us what we are like. He's not necessarily an example for us as much as he is an example of us. Because isn't it Jesus who says, greater works than I've done you will do. I'm trying to show you the path. I'm trying to show you, what you are. In Matthew 5 through 7, this is the great sermon of Jesus. We call it the Sermon on the Mount. And it's interesting. He's standing there talking to these crowds, it says. Matthew says that these crowds are there. And these crowds include, we learn later, these crowds include religious people, religious leaders. It includes tax collectors. That may not mean much to us, but in that time, tax collectors were kind of like evil people. They were collecting taxes, and a lot of them were being dishonest about it. Think of them as politicians. So they're there. Prostitutes are there. The scum of society, a lot of different people. People from all kinds of walks of life. Evil people, good people. They're all there. And it says that Jesus said to all of them, you are the light of the world. To all of them. So the reason I'm saying this is because Jesus is trying to say to all of us, don't exclude yourself from this. You are important. One time Jesus is asked, why is it that you welcome sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes? Why do you welcome all these people and you eat with them? You fellowship with them. Why is this? And to answer their question, I think this is in Luke 15, to answer their question, he says, he tells them 3 stories to demonstrate why this is so. He tells them about a shepherd. So there was a shepherd who had 100 sheep, and one of them left the fold. And this shepherd left all 99 behind and went looking for the one lost sheep, saying to you, you are important to the fold. And then he tells a story about a woman who lost a coin, and a very valuable coin. And it says that the woman, because this was so valuable, she swept the entire house, cleaned every corner of the house, cleaned it up in order to find that coin. He's saying, you are valuable. And then he tells a story that some of us are familiar with about a lost son. He says there was a father who had this son, and he wanted to collect all of his inheritance early and go out and do what he wanted to do with it. He was done living with his father, done living on his father's land. I want my inheritance now, before you die, so I can go and invest it and do whatever I want to do. So he runs out. But he's not a very good investor, so he winds up squandering the whole thing in riotous living, whatever that is. Maybe he went to Vegas, played the slots, bought some prostitutes, I don't know. But he winds up spending all of it, and finds himself in a really bad situation. But he comes to himself and says, you know what? I can at least go back to my father's house and just be a servant. And maybe work off what I owe my father. I know I can do that. I know my dad would at least let me come back and just be a servant. So he heads back with this story. He's going to appeal to his father to do this. And he gets back, and the father says, before anything can be said, the father runs to him and hugs him and embraces him. Before the son can say anything, he welcomes him home and throws a party. And all this is to say that you, all of you, no matter what you've done, no matter where you've been, no matter how smart you are or unintelligent you think you are, no matter what your situation, you are important like the sheep who was lost. You are valuable like the coin that was lost. And you are cherished like a child of the Father. It's incredible, right? One time Jesus was asked about who we are, and he said, when the people come to you and ask you, where did you come from? He says, tell them that you came from the light that generated itself, that made itself, that manifested itself. And when they ask you, are you that light? Say, no, but we're its children. And, the thing is, we're not so much afraid of our own darkness as we are discovering our light. You start talking about these kinds of things, and there are actually people who get upset about telling someone who maybe is an addict, maybe is in trouble with the law, and maybe has done some dastardly things, and you start talking about how Jesus sees them as important, valuable, and cherished. And some reason we get all wound up about that. It can't be true. It's because we're afraid of the light that is within us. And to discover what we are, we don't look at the outside. We look at the inside. In Psalm 139, King David says, before I was formed in my mother's womb, you knew me. And all my days were written out even before one of them came to pass. That's incredible. You know what that says? It says that, and he also says this to Jeremiah in Jeremiah 1 verse 5. You know what that says is I was here. I don't know what it is, but I was something before I became this something, this form maybe I was essence, spirit maybe. Because in John 4, Jesus says that God is spirit. And they that worship him must worship him in that truth. That truth. The truth that God is spirit, not form. And if we came from God, maybe that's what he knew us as before we took on all of this form. In Genesis, in the origin of man, it says that when God created this human, that he took dust and he formed the human of the dust, made this perfect specimen of a human with eyes and ears and nose and mouth and hair and lungs, kidneys, liver, heart, a vascular system, a nervous system. It's all there, but it doesn't do anything, no life. But it gives us this picture. It says, Genesis gives us this picture. It says that God reached down and he breathed into the nostrils of this human specimen, and it became a living being. And this breath in the original language there, the word is ruach. And that word means, we translate that word into English as spirit, breath, spirit, life. That's what God is. And if you can receive it, that's what we are at our essence. Not body, not mind, but we are more than that. That's why I often say, and I'm not the first to say it, I'm not sure who I got it from, but some philosopher said this, is that we are better than the worst thing we've ever done. I really believe that. There's more to us than all of our actions, good or bad. There's more to us than that. And so this breath, this life within us, I think is what David is talking about. Solomon says that the spirit of man is the lamp of the Lord. Does that sound familiar? You are the light of the world. You are the lamp of God. That lamp, that light, that spirit within us is the observer, the watcher, not the doer or the thinker. Your Father, our Father, is God. Let me tell you a story. There was this king and queen in a vast kingdom. They were young, and they wanted to have children. And so they began trying to have a child, a son, to pass the kingdom on to. And so they were blessed, and they had this beautiful little boy. But before the little boy was much out of babyhood, the king and queen's enemies came and they kidnapped the child, asking for a ransom. And of course, they paid the ransom to get the child back, but the child was never returned. And years and years went by. They lost their child and they never had another. So one day, maybe 20 years later, the king decided, my kingdom has grown immensely. I'd like to put together an entourage and go and inspect all of the kingdom from one end to the other. And so he did. They went out and they began traveling, and they traveled to this far out, remote little peasant village. And they came into the village, and as they were coming down the main street between the huts, all the entourage suddenly fall to their knees and bow down behind the king. And the king's curious, why this? So he looks up and he sees this young man coming out of one of the huts. And he looks at him and he recognizes immediately why they're bowing down. This young man looks exactly like the king. And they eventually realize this is the king's son. But he's lived all of his life as a peasant, and he doesn't know anything else. So they carry him back to the castle, and they begin to retrain him to be who he already is. And I think that's a story that is our story. Is that somehow when we came into this world, we lost the sense of what we truly are. That our Father is God, the King, who owns the entire kingdom. And as Jesus said, your Father knows what you need before you ask. If you ask for it all, he would gladly give it to you. He says, if you, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more your Heavenly Father wants to give the kingdom to you. But we have to retrain, rethink what we are, what we're about. And that's inside. It's the breath, the life of God. In Job 32:8, Elihu, this young prophet, says this. He says, the Spirit of God, or the Spirit of man, rather, is the breath of the Almighty. Did you get that? The Spirit of man is the breath of the Almighty. That is in us is the breath of the Almighty. When I was telling you earlier that Jesus was saying that we came from this light, that we're the children of this light. Jesus says, if they ask you, what is the sign of the Father or this light in you? He says, tell them it is both movement and rest. What is it that is both movement and rest? Movement, rest. If you're breathing, that is the sign that your Father is there in you, that you're a part of him. That's our identity. That's where we begin. So I want to encourage you today, think about that. Every time you take a breath, every time you move, that the life in you is connected to your Father. Cool?